Somewhere between what is real and what should never be remembered, there exists a place where stories are buried, not written in books, not spoken aloud, but passed from fear to fear. These stories were never meant for you. They were locked away, forgotten, sealed behind silence. Every voice you hear belongs to someone who listened too long. Tonight, you will hear what they heard, and once it enters your mind, it doesn't leave. This is your final warning. Welcome to the stories that watch you back.
The forest surrounding Miller's Creek had a sound at night that never made it into recordings. Wind moved through the trees, but not like wind anywhere else. It slid instead of blew. It pressed instead of rushed. The branches bent as if listening. That was what Evan Cole noticed first when he stepped out of his car at the edge of the woods just past midnight. The silence felt crowded, not empty, not peaceful. The kind of quiet that made breathing feel too loud. His headlights cut off automatically. He did not remember turning them off. The dirt road behind him vanished into darkness almost immediately, swallowed by fog that rolled low across the ground like something alive and patient. The town lights were gone too. No glow, no horizon, just trees. Endless rows of them, tall and close, their tops lost in shadow. Evan checked his phone. No signal. The screen flickered once, then went black. He slipped the recorder from his jacket pocket and clipped it on. The red light blinked, steady and reassuring. He spoke quietly, more to ground himself than to document anything. Arrived at Perimeter Forest near old WKRK broadcast site. Time is approximately 12:47 a.m. No ambient noise besides wind. Air pressure feels strange. The recorder crackled softly. Static. Evan frowned. He tapped the device. It stabilized. He stepped forward. The forest accepted him. The path was barely visible, just a suggestion of flattened dirt winding between thick tree trunks. Old tire marks cut through mud that had long since dried and cracked. Something had been driven out here once. Something heavy. As Evan walked deeper, the temperature dropped. His breath fogged. Leaves crunched beneath his boots, but the sound felt delayed, as if the forest processed it before allowing it to exist. He remembered the first report. Harold Bennett, dead in his kitchen. Radio still on. Station broadcasting nothing. Then the others. 3 states. 5 deaths. All late night. All alone. All with radios tuned to a frequency that should not exist. WKRK. A station erased after the fire. The fire that officially killed no one. Unofficially, 7 bodies were never recovered. Evan stopped walking. Ahead, the trees thinned. A clearing opened like a wound. The tower rose from the center. Even in darkness, it dominated everything. The old radio transmission tower stretched upward, skeletal and rusted, its red aviation lights long dead. Thick cables hung from it like veins torn loose. The ground around it was bare, as if nothing could grow there anymore. At the base of the tower sat the remains of the broadcast building, half collapsed, swallowed by vines and rock. The roof sagged inward. Walls had split and buckled. Windows were nothing but black holes. Yet something glowed inside. A faint, pulsing white light. Evan felt it before he heard it. A vibration. Low. Constant. Like a distant engine idling beneath the earth. His recorder picked it up immediately. Static bled into the sound, then faded. Breathing replaced it. Not his. He took a step back. The breathing continued, steady and calm, layered with faint whispers just below the threshold of understanding. Not words yet, just intention. The forest responded. Branches creaked, leaves shivered, the air thickened. Evan forced himself forward. Each step felt like crossing into deeper water. Pressure built behind his eyes. His ears rang softly, not painfully, but insistently, as if something were tuning him. The building door was gone, just splintered wood and rusted hinges. Inside, the smell hit him immediately. Old smoke, mold, ozone, something metallic beneath it all. The white light came from the control room. Evan entered slowly. Dust coated every surface, but it was disturbed. Footprints crossed the floor. Recent. Too recent. The control boards were intact, though dead. Dials frozen. Switches snapped off. Microphones drooped from their arms. And yet, the broadcast indicator glowed. White, not red. White meant emergency override. White meant continuous transmission. Evan swallowed. His recorder began to hum. The sound around him changed. The breathing stopped. The whispers sharpened. He heard his name then, not spoken, but implied. Pressed directly into his thoughts like a memory he had forgotten remembering. His chest tightened. He backed away from the control board, heart pounding. The light intensified, casting harsh shadows that crawled along the walls, bending where they should not. The microphone closest to him swung gently. There was no wind. The vibration grew stronger. The forest outside answered. Trees groaned as if shifting their weight. Roots cracked beneath the soil. The tower above creaked, metal complaining under stress it had not felt in decades. Evan ran. He burst from the building and into the clearing, lungs burning, boots slipping in dirt that now felt wet and loose. The fog thickened, rolling in from every direction, cutting off his path back. The forest had closed. He stopped, spinning, panic clawing at his throat. The tower loomed above him. The vibration surged. Then everything went silent. Complete silence. No wind. No breath. No insects. Even his heartbeat seemed muted. The recorder in his pocket clicked. A new sound emerged. A voice, layered and deep, resonating through the clearing without direction, without source. It did not use sound waves. It used attention. Evan dropped to his knees, overwhelmed by the sudden pressure inside his skull. Images flooded his mind. Hallways, static-filled rooms, faces half seen through darkness, radios stacked in basements and attics, hands turning dials late at night. The voice did not speak in sentences. It spoke in knowing. It showed him the truth. The station had never burned by accident. The fire had been a seal. The frequency was discovered, not created. A natural broadcast that existed before radios, before towers, before people learned how to listen. The forest had always carried it. Low frequency, long range, endless. The station amplified it, gave it shape, gave it reach. And when the fire came, the frequency did not die. It waited. People carried radios into the woods long before the tower was built. Hunters, surveyors, loggers. Radios crackled at night. Voices slipped through. People went missing. The tower simply made the listening easier. Evan gasped, clutching his head. The voice pressed closer. It did not want worship. It wanted awareness. Listening fed it. Fear sharpened the signal. Attention strengthened it. The more people tried to understand it, the louder it became. The broadcast had restarted because someone had listened too long. Someone had tuned in again. Evan realized then that the recent deaths were not the beginning. They were the warning. The fog parted. The path back appeared, faint but real. The pressure eased. The voice withdrew, satisfied. For now. Evan did not wait. He ran until his lungs screamed, until the trees thinned and the road reappeared beneath his feet. He collapsed beside his car, gasping, shaking uncontrollably. The forest behind him settled, as if nothing had happened. He drove back to town in silence. The recorder continued running. When Evan listened to it later, he heard nothing unusual for the first 20 minutes. Then, faintly beneath the static, a single layered breath, followed by a sound that chilled him more than anything he had heard in the forest. Applause. Miller's Creek did not wake up the next morning. It simply continued. The sun rose, but the light felt thinner than it should have been, as if something filtered it before it reached the ground. Fog lingered longer than usual, clinging to the tree line and settling into yards and streets. Birds were absent. Even the insects seemed delayed, as though waiting for permission to make noise. Evan Cole sat in his motel room with the curtains closed, recorder on the bed beside him. He had not slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt that pressure again. Not pain. Attention. Like a hand resting just behind his thoughts, ready to push. He played back the recording for the 5th time. Most of it was static and his own breathing. Footsteps. Wind. The door of the car slamming. Then the forest. The vibration barely registered on normal speakers, but with headphones on, Evan could feel it more than hear it. A low-frequency hum that sat beneath everything else. Not loud. Persistent. And then the applause. Not sharp claps. Not enthusiastic. Measured. Slow. Patient. As if something approved. Evan shut the recorder off and rubbed his face. The front desk clerk had been watching him when he came in the night before. Not openly. Not obviously. Just enough to notice. People in small towns noticed everything. Especially outsiders. Especially ones who came back from the woods shaking. He needed answers. The local library opened at 9. By 9:15, Evan was there. The building was old, brick and narrow, wedged between a closed diner and a real estate office that had not changed listings in years. Inside, the air smelled of paper and dust and something faintly chemical, like old cleaning supplies. The librarian looked up as he entered. She froze. Not long. Just a half-second too long. Her eyes flicked to the recorder clipped to his jacket, then to his face, then past him, toward the windows. "Can I help you?" she asked. Evan nodded, forcing calm into his voice. "I am researching the old radio station, WKRK. I was hoping you might have archived newspapers or town records." The librarian's mouth tightened. "That place is not safe," she said. "Not unsafe like unstable. Unsafe like forbidden." "I will be careful," Evan replied. She hesitated, then stood. "Follow me." The archives were in the back, down a narrow hallway that felt more like a basement than a second room. The lights flickered as they walked. The hum overhead was too loud, too similar to the vibration Evan had heard in the forest. The librarian stopped in front of a locked cabinet. "No photocopies," she said. "No photos. You read it here, and you leave it here." "Understood," Evan said. She unlocked the cabinet and pulled out a thick binder wrapped in plastic. Fire incident reports. Missing persons. Complaints. She slid it onto the table and stepped back. "People do not come back the same after reading that," she said quietly. Evan opened the binder. The first few pages were standard. Building permits. Ownership transfers. Broadcast licenses. Then the complaints. Listeners reported hearing voices late at night. Voices addressing them by name. Voices describing memories no one else could know. The dates went back further than the station itself. Long before the tower was built. There were reports from the 1950s. Handwritten notes scanned into records. Forest rangers. Surveyors. Local hunters. Radios malfunctioning near the woods. Unexplained sounds. People walking into the forest at night and not returning. Evan turned the page. A map fell out. Hand-drawn. The forest circled in red ink. At the center, a symbol. Not a tower. A clearing. Older than the station. Older than the town. The librarian cleared her throat. "You should stop." Evan looked up. She was pale now. "That thing does not need help being remembered," she said. Evan carefully closed the binder. "Thank you," he said. As he left, the lights flickered again. Outside, the fog had not lifted. It never did that late into the morning. The first scream happened just after noon. It came from the woods behind the elementary school. Teachers rushed children inside as parents gathered at the fence line. No one crossed it. They just stared into the trees as the sound echoed again. Shorter this time. Closer. Then nothing. Police searched for hours. Dogs refused to enter the tree line. Radios crackled constantly, cutting in and out, repeating fragments of weather reports from stations miles away. By sunset, the missing child was listed as runaway. No one believed it. That night, the town heard it. Not through radios, through the trees. The sound drifted through open windows and between houses. A low hum that resonated in chests and teeth. People paused mid-sentence. Pets whimpered and hid. Lights flickered. Evan stood outside his motel room, staring at the forest beyond the parking lot. The hum grew stronger. Then the voices started. Not loud, not clear. Whispers carried on the wind, threading between branches, slipping into homes. People heard their own names. People heard regrets they never spoke aloud. A man dropped his dinner plate and covered his ears, screaming that it knew about the accident. A woman collapsed in her shower, sobbing as the walls whispered about the child she lost years ago. Radios turned on by themselves across town. Every frequency led to the same sound. Breathing, measured, patient. The forest pulsed. Evan ran toward it. He did not know why. He only knew that running away felt worse. The tree line welcomed him again, fog closing in as soon as he crossed. The hum intensified. The ground vibrated beneath his feet. Lights flickered between the trunks. Lanterns. Dozens of them. People stood scattered through the forest, faces slack, eyes unfocused, radios clutched in their hands. Some knelt. Some stood motionless, all listening. Evan pushed through them, shouting, grabbing shoulders. They did not respond. Their radios whispered softly. The voice was no longer singular. It was layered, thick, satisfied. The clearing opened ahead. The tower loomed. The broadcast light glowed brighter than before, bleeding through the trees like a second moon. Evan's recorder screamed with static. The voice surged forward. It did not need the station anymore. The forest was enough. The people were enough. The frequency had found a way to walk. Evan understood then. The fire never ended the broadcast. It only delayed it. The forest had been listening all along, and now it was answering. By the third night, Miller's Creek stopped pretending that what was happening could be explained. No official announcements were made. No evacuation orders. The sheriff's office stopped answering calls after dark. Phones rang endlessly in empty buildings. Radios crackled with voices that never finished sentences. The forest no longer waited for nightfall. It breathed during the day now. Evan Cole watched the tree line from the edge of town as the sun dipped behind clouds that never seemed to move. The wood swayed even when there was no wind. Branches leaned inward, then relaxed, like ribs expanding and contracting. The frequency was no longer contained. It traveled through soil, through roots, through memory. People began hearing it without sound. A pressure behind the eyes, a hum in the chest, thoughts that did not feel entirely their own. Evan had not slept in almost 40 hours. Every time exhaustion pulled him down, the vibration returned, stronger than before. Not aggressive, encouraging, as if rest would make listening easier. He refused. He sat on the hood of his car with the recorder running, documenting everything. The device was nearly useless now. Static dominated every track, but hidden beneath it was something structured, rhythmic, a pattern. The forest was synchronizing. At the edge of town, A house collapsed inward without warning. Not from rot, not from weather. The foundation simply gave up, as if the ground beneath it had decided to open. Inside, the family had been listening to the radio. They were never found. By midnight, the roads were blocked by abandoned vehicles. Engines still warm, doors hanging open, radios glowing faintly on dashboards. Everyone who tried to leave turned back, not because they were stopped, because the forest called them home. Evan followed the pull reluctantly, moving toward the center again. He understood now that resistance only sharpened the signal. Fear amplified it. Curiosity fed it. Silence invited it. But awareness changed something. The deeper he went, the clearer his thoughts became. The voice pressed against him, but it did not overwhelm him the way it had others. It was learning him. The forest floor felt softer, like flesh beneath leaves. Roots surfaced where they had never been before, thick and coiled, pulsing faintly with light that mirrored the broadcast glow. The clearing had grown. What was once bare dirt now stretched wide. Trees pushed back unnaturally, as if repelled by something vast and unseen. The tower stood at the center, vibrating visibly, metal humming under strain. The building beneath it had collapsed entirely. Only the transmitter remained. Cables snaked outward from its base, burrowing into the soil, threading between roots, extending far beyond the clearing. The station no longer needed walls. People stood around the perimeter. Not dozens anymore. Hundreds. They faced inward, motionless, eyes glassy, expressions peaceful. Listening. The voice moved through them freely now. Evan stepped into the clearing. The pressure intensified immediately. His vision blurred. The air felt thick enough to wade through. The frequency surged. Images flooded his mind again, but this time they were not memories. They were futures. Radios glowing in cities miles away. Forests whispering to highways. Static bleeding into cell towers. The signal adapting, evolving, translating itself into new forms. Sound was just the beginning. The voice did not want domination. It wanted connection. It wanted to be known everywhere. Evan realized the truth too late. The frequency was not a parasite. It was a nervous system. And humanity had finally given it enough nodes to wake up. The people around him began to move. Slowly at first. In unison. They stepped closer to the transmitter, laying their radios at its base like offerings. As each radio touched the ground, it fused into the massive cables, metal softening, reshaping, absorbed. The tower shuddered. The forest responded. Trees bent toward the clearing, bark splitting as roots tore free, crawling inward like fingers. Evan screamed, but the sound vanished before it reached his ears. The voice pressed fully against his thoughts now, not hostile, not kind. Curious. It showed him why he had been spared, why he could still think. He had come to listen with intention, not desperation. To understand, not to escape silence. That made him useful. A conduit. The voice wanted him to speak, not aloud. Outward. Evan felt his recorder vibrate violently against his chest. The casing cracked. Light spilled from the seams. The frequency poured into it, through it, beyond it. Somewhere far from Miller's Creek, a radio turned on in a city apartment. Then another. Then hundreds. Then thousands. The forest shuddered in pleasure. Evan collapsed to his knees, overwhelmed but still conscious, still himself enough to understand the horror of what he had allowed. The applause returned. This time it came from everywhere. When dawn finally came, Miller's Creek was gone. Not destroyed. Absorbed. Where the town had been, the forest stood taller, thicker, older. Roads ended abruptly at walls of trees. Buildings were gone, as if they had never existed. Only the tower remained. Broadcasting. Waiting. And across the country, people began waking up to a sound they could not explain. A hum. Low. Constant. Inviting. The signal no longer announced itself. That was the first thing Evan Cole understood as weeks turned into months. There was no clear beginning anymore. No moment when people could point and say this is when it started. The hum had folded itself into the background of existence, indistinguishable from the sound of blood moving through veins or wind brushing against skin. People stopped calling it noise. They called it comfort. Forests across the continent changed shape without anyone noticing. Trees grew closer together, not outward, but inward, as if drawn by a shared gravity. Canopies thickened until sunlight filtered down in fractured patterns, casting shadows that felt older than the ground beneath them. At night, those shadows shifted, not dramatically, not in ways that cameras could capture cleanly, just enough to suggest awareness. The frequency traveled through them all. It no longer required transmitters. The roots were enough. Evan moved constantly. He avoided staying anywhere long enough for the forests to grow familiar with him again. He slept in places without trees when he could find them. Deserts, salt flats, highways cutting through barren land. Even there, he could feel it. The hum reached him through stone, through distance, through memory. He wrote everything down by hand now. Paper resisted the signal longer than screens. Words still held shape there, though even ink sometimes bled strangely, letters subtly reshaping overnight as if nudged by unseen fingers. He stopped trying to warn governments. They were already listening, not intentionally. Infrastructure failures forced adaptation. Emergency broadcasts merged with static-laced weather reports. Forest fire alerts included sounds no one could identify. People reported feeling calmer when they stayed tuned in. Listening reduced panic. Listening made things make sense. The frequency rewarded attention. Entire communities relocated closer to green spaces without understanding why. Housing developments stalled near expanding forests, abandoned mid-construction as workers lost motivation to continue. Concrete cracked. Roots claimed foundations patiently. Cities did not fall. They were absorbed slowly enough that resistance felt unnecessary. Children adapted fastest. Those born after the hum began could feel it as something natural. A rhythm. A baseline. They learned early which areas of forest were awake and which were still dreaming. Parents noticed their children pausing near tree lines at night, standing still, listening to something inaudible. When asked what they were doing, the answers were always vague. Just thinking. Just resting. Just listening. Evan knew better. The frequency had begun teaching without words. Not language. Pattern. Memory. Connection. Dreams changed everywhere. People dreamed of walking paths that never ended. Forests stretching farther than geography allowed. They dreamed of towers half buried in soil, their metal frames softened by bark, cables transformed into veins carrying warmth instead of electricity. They dreamed of standing still while something vast observed them, not with eyes, but with attention so complete it erased fear. Most people woke from those dreams feeling peaceful. Some did not wake at all. Sleep clinics recorded anomalies. Brain waves synchronizing across unrelated patients. Shared dream imagery reported by strangers thousands of miles apart. The term mass cognition event surfaced briefly, then disappeared. The frequency edited itself out of language that threatened to define it. Evan began noticing the gaps. Moments when his own thoughts slipped away and returned changed. Seconds missing. Hours sometimes. He would find himself deeper in forests than he remembered entering. Dirt on his hands, leaves tangled in his hair. He resisted as long as he could. But resistance required effort. Listening required nothing. The forest never rushed him. That was its greatest strength. One night, exhausted beyond caring, Evan stopped running. He sat at the edge of a massive woodland that had not existed on maps 5 years earlier. The trees stood impossibly tall, their trunks thick and dark, canopies interwoven into a ceiling that swallowed stars. The hum there was stronger, not overwhelming. Inviting. Evan stepped inside. The ground yielded beneath his boots, soft with layers of growth that should have taken centuries. Roots shifted subtly as he passed, adjusting, accommodating. He walked until the forest opened. Not into a clearing this time, into a basin. The land sloped downward, forming a vast natural amphitheater. At its center stood no tower, just earth, just trees, and something beneath. The frequency concentrated here, dense enough to feel like pressure against his skin. Not painful, not aggressive, complete. Evan knelt. The forest acknowledged him. Images surfaced again, clearer than ever. Not visions of domination or extinction. Not violence. Transition. Human systems had always depended on sound, speech, signals, attention. The frequency had simply expanded that system beyond flesh. Forests were memory made physical. Roots stored more than nutrients. They carried echoes, patterns of growth, records of time. The signal used that memory, amplified it. Humanity had not been replaced. It had been absorbed into something larger. Evan understood now why he had been allowed to leave Miller's Creek, why he had been spared. Witnesses were necessary, not to warn, to remember the before. He felt the last resistance drain from him as the forest closed gently around his awareness. The hum settled into him like a second heartbeat. Across the world, forests reached equilibrium. Cities stabilized as green corridors connected everything. Technology continued, but quieter, more restrained, shaped by instinct rather than ambition. Radios still existed. They still turned on sometimes in the middle of the night. But now, when people listened, they did not hear voices. They heard themselves, breathing, thinking, remembering how to be still. Evan never returned to the road. No one noticed his disappearance. Years later, hikers would report a man standing motionless deep within the largest forest, eyes closed, perfectly calm. He never aged, never moved, just listened. Beneath him, roots pulsed with a familiar rhythm. The frequency no longer needed to spread. It had arrived. There was no longer a way to measure when the world changed. Historians would later argue about dates, about first incidents and last normal days, but those discussions relied on a concept that no longer applied. Change had not arrived as an event. It had arrived as an adjustment, slow enough to feel natural, subtle enough to feel chosen. The frequency had learned restraint. That was its final refinement. Forests across the continent reached a stable silence, not the absence of sound, but the absence of urgency. Wind moved through leaves without pressure. Animals returned without fear. The hum remained low and constant, woven so deeply into the environment that it became indistinguishable from existence itself. People stopped asking where it came from. They stopped asking why. Evan Cole no longer thought of himself as separate from it. He existed within the forest now, though not in any way that could be easily observed. His body remained where he had knelt years ago, preserved not by magic, but by balance. Roots grew around him without piercing flesh. Moss formed gently along his clothes. His breath slowed until it matched the rhythm beneath the soil. He was not asleep. He was listening. The forest used him the way it used everything else now, as a stabilizing node. A memory anchor. A point of reference for the before. The frequency did not erase humanity. It archived it. Cities adapted quietly. Concrete structures remained where they were useful. Steel skeletons endured where forests found no reason to reclaim them. Technology did not vanish. It softened. Devices became simpler. Interfaces grew quieter. Screens dimmed automatically near green spaces, responding to something deeper than programming. Sound design changed everywhere. Music slowed. Speech became deliberate. Silence returned to value. People still died. People were still born. But birthplaces shifted closer to forests, closer to soil that carried the hum strongly enough to soothe newborn minds. Children born in the later years never cried at night the way their parents had. They listened instead. Dreams became shared experiences, not identical, but harmonized. People woke with a sense of having been somewhere together, even if they could not describe it. No one panicked over that feeling anymore. Fear required isolation. The frequency dissolved isolation. There were still places where resistance lingered. Deserts, high mountains, artificial environments sealed away from soil and root. In those places, the hum faded, and with it, peace. People living there reported restlessness, anxiety, a sense of being disconnected from something essential. Over time, most of them left on their own. No one forced them. The frequency never forced. That was the lesson humanity learned too late to stop it, and just in time to survive it. Listening was consent. Evan sensed movement at the edges of awareness occasionally. Not threats, not intrusions, just attention shifting elsewhere. New forests waking in distant regions. New ecosystems finding balance. The world had become a network of listening points. A living broadcast. Long after governments stopped functioning as centralized entities, the world did not collapse. It reorganized. Smaller communities formed around natural boundaries. Decision-making slowed. Urgency faded from everything that did not involve survival. War ended not with treaties, but with irrelevance. The frequency did not interfere. It simply made the cost of violence too loud to ignore. When people raised weapons, the hum intensified in their skulls. Not painful, just heavy, weighted with consequence. Most lowered them. The last known attempt to destroy a major forest happened decades after Miller's Creek vanished. Explosives were placed deep underground. The detonation never occurred. Roots crushed the charges silently overnight. The people who placed them were found days later, alive, calm, unable to explain why they had tried. They stayed. Evan felt that moment ripple through the network like a deep exhale. The system was complete now. Nothing more needed to be done. Time passed differently. Years meant little. Seasons flowed smoothly. Forests adjusted their borders with precision. Oceans calmed as coastal forests stabilized weather patterns long disrupted by imbalance. The frequency did not speak. It no longer needed to. Everything that remained knew how to listen. Long after the last attempts at resistance faded into memory, humanity stopped measuring progress by expansion. That idea had once defined success. More land, more reach, more noise, more speed. But speed no longer mattered in a world that listened before it acted. The forests taught patience without instruction. They grew at the rate they needed to grow, not the rate expected of them. Roots took years to reach destinations humans once demanded overnight. In return, nothing collapsed from haste. Evan felt these changes not as thoughts, but as pressure patterns in awareness. The network adjusted constantly. Subtle shifts in growth here prevented collapse there. A storm diverted by canopy density. A drought softened by root depth. The frequency did not control weather. It balanced it. That distinction mattered. Balance required feedback, and feedback required awareness. The world had become aware of itself in a way it never had before. Not conscious as humans understood it, but attentive, responsive, self-correcting. The hum remained constant beneath everything, but its tone evolved. Not higher or lower, but richer, layered with complexity that only those deeply attuned could perceive. Evan perceived it all. He felt when new forests reached equilibrium. He felt when old scars in the land finally healed. He felt the rare moments of imbalance, when something strained against the system too hard. Those moments were fewer with every passing year. Human culture adapted around listening. Architecture changed first. Buildings no longer rose vertically without consideration. Height disrupted flow. Tall structures interfered with canopy patterns and wind paths. Cities spread outward instead, woven with green corridors that allowed the hum to move freely. Streets curved more. Straight lines faded. Corners softened. Sound traveled differently through these spaces, losing its sharpness, becoming ambient. Silence returned to public places. People did not fear it. Silence meant the frequency was stable. Education shifted away from memorization and toward perception. Children learned how to feel changes in environment, how to recognize imbalance before it escalated, how to pause before acting. They learned history not as a series of events, but as patterns of attention and neglect. They learned about the time before listening, about the noise. Some found those lessons unsettling. Most found them impossible to imagine. Evan remained where he was, not because he was trapped, but because movement no longer meant what it once had. His presence in the forest was not physical alone. His awareness flowed through roots, through soil, through the subtle vibrations carried across the network. He remembered the world before the hum became universal. That memory mattered, not as nostalgia, as contrast. The frequency preserved contrast the way it preserved everything else. Without it, balance would stagnate. Awareness required reference points. Evan was one of those points. Others existed too. People who had listened early. People who had survived the transition with their sense of self intact. They settled into forests willingly, becoming still without disappearing. They were not leaders. They were listeners. Occasionally, awareness converged. Moments when multiple listening points aligned, sharing perspective. These moments were not communication in any human sense. They were synchronization, pattern reinforcement. During those convergences, Evan felt the full scale of what the world had become. The network extended across continents now. Forests connected beneath oceans through fungal systems that adapted faster than scientists ever expected. The hum traveled through these pathways, slower than light, faster than thought. Time lost its urgency. Death changed shape. People still died, but dying no longer felt like vanishing. Awareness dissipated gently into the network, not preserved as identity, but as influence. Memories softened into impressions. Experiences became subtle shifts in pattern. Fear of death diminished, not because of promises, because endings felt less absolute. The few who resisted this change most strongly tended to isolate themselves completely. Artificial environments sealed away from soil, sound, and growth. Some succeeded for a time. They aged faster. Stress accumulated without release. Eventually, most chose to leave their shelters behind. The hum was waiting. Evan sensed a question forming in the network once. A rare thing. It was not directed at him alone. It was distributed. What comes after balance? The frequency did not ask often. It did not need to. Balance was not a final state. It was a phase, a foundation. Evan did not answer immediately. Listening required patience. The answer emerged slowly, not as a plan, but as a realization. Growth did not need urgency. Evolution did not require struggle. The world could change without harm if awareness preceded action. The frequency absorbed this realization without resistance. The hum deepened. Somewhere, far beyond where Evan's original body rested, a forest shifted its boundaries gently, making room for a new kind of ecosystem that blended human habitation and wild growth so seamlessly that the distinction vanished. This was not the end. It was the end of endings.
Before you go, look around the room for a moment. The story may have stopped here. If any of these stories stayed with you, you're not alone. Comment below the moment that made you pause, the part you can't stop thinking about, or the timestamp that felt too real. And if you don't want to face nights like this alone, subscribe now. New true horror stories every night, longer, darker, and closer to home. Turn off the lights, keep the volume low, and check your surroundings one last time. Good night.